It's another busy day on the campaign trail for Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, with Election Day now just 3 days away. Kamala Harris and her running mate Tim Walz will host a campaign concert in Charlotte, North Carolina today, featuring John Bon Jovi, Khalid, and several other music stars. And then Trump will be making campaign stops in North Carolina and Virginia today as the race for the White House moves into its final stretch. And everyone trying to predict what we know, what it all means. Let's welcome back political expert Corey Cook, St. Mary's Executive Provost. So much to talk about. But really what I think people are talking about right now is voter engagement, because certainly we know you've got 240 million or so Americans who can vote. We've got more than 66 million who can vote or who already have voted. What are we learning in terms of really the breakdown? Because we're looking at party affiliation. We can't determine how they voted, but we're looking at who's coming to the ballot box.
We're looking at whether they're voters who didn't vote in the 2020 election. We're looking at where they live. We're looking at their party affiliation. We're looking at their age, right? And so there's a lot of tea leaves being read right now, and they're being read differently in different states. So right now, Democrats are pretty encouraged about how they're doing in Michigan and Pennsylvania. Republicans have been very encouraged about how they're doing in Wisconsin and in Arizona and Georgia.
And so, I mean, is there anything we shouldn't take away from it? Because certainly we're trying to read a lot into it. We're looking at women voters. We're looking at young voters. But what should we not fall into in terms of
honestly, we shouldn't look at any of it right now, to be honest, right? So we don't really know how the voters are going to vote early or not, right? What matters is who is engaged in the election, and whether they plan to vote early or plan to vote on election day doesn't really matter, right? And so right now I think we can validate a lot of our assumptions about the electorate looking at early voters. Really what we should be looking at is some of the big trends that are happening around the country, right? So what we're seeing is voter engagement and enthusiasm is much higher on the Democratic side than the Republican side.
The record's broken in North Carolina. They set the record that was first set in 2020. Georgia also breaking records.
Yeah, so there's some bigger national trends that are happening. I think a lot of folks are focused on, you know, what do we know that voter turnout is down 7 percentage points from 2020 in the city of Milwaukee? And the answer is we don't really know, because again, how the voters have been engaged, whether they're going to vote on election day. Obviously, Republicans in 2020 were not trumpeting early voting. In fact, Donald Trump was saying, do not vote early. And so that Republicans have now adopted an early voting strategy means we can't take a lot away from the 2020 election compared to 2024.
But we also know the gender gap, when you're talking about women voting more than 10% more than men, when we have it being a post-Roe election in terms of the overturning of Roe and the Dobbs decision, that's significant. Also, are these Republicans who are voting earlier, we're seeing those big numbers, are those voters who would have already just voted on election day, or are they just changing habits?
Yeah, and so that's why it's hard to read too much into it, because we don't know if those are voters who would have voted anyway. And so ultimately, again, we can reach a lot of conclusions based on sort of validating our current assumptions. But what I would encourage folks to look at is, obviously the gender gap is growing and significant. If turnout among women continues to outstrip that of men, Kamala Harris will win the election, right? The gender gap is so significant in this election. What we're seeing from younger voters is actually late engagement. Late engagement favors the vice president. What we're seeing again in surveys is those who are making up their mind later are breaking in her favor. So there are some significant trends. What I would discourage folks from doing is, unless they know a lot about individual precincts and individual states, is say, how can we read too much away from Michigan?
We want to know so badly.
We want to know so badly.
We're also watching these states. This has been the big discussion, right? We can't help but stare at these 7 states: Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. So the question is, when will we know? And the problem is it's kind of different with every state. So if we take a look at North Carolina, 90% of their votes expected by election day. So we might hear from them first. Georgia, they've got some new laws, right? The new law that says we'll know by 8 p.m. because they took the longest. You know, I mean, we didn't know until the weekend in 2020. Wisconsin, maybe the day after. And then if we go to the other battleground states, I mean, this is one of those things. Michigan, November 6th, Pennsylvania, that may be a wait.
It may be a wait. Arizona could be a very long wait.
Yes, 10 to 13 days. Nevada, maybe you might have an idea. Does this give you an idea of a prediction? Because I'm sure everyone's asking you, so will we know by Wednesday? Will we know by Thursday? Will it take to the weekend? I guess it just depends on how everything starts to add up. It's numbers.
Right. It's all about the math. And it depends on how close it is. I think we're going to know on Wednesday, because I think, frankly, the likelihood is that the polls are wrong. We just don't know which direction they're wrong in. And my guess is that it's actually not going to be as close as the national polling is indicating.
Why do you believe the polls are wrong? I mean, the polls say this is going to be neck and neck till the very end, and it'll just, the worst naysayers are like it's gonna be December before we find out. But you think the polls are wrong, and why is that?
Because they're always wrong. They're always wrong by 2 percentage points, right? And so they're off more than that in the 2016 election. Pollsters changed their methodology and corrected somewhat, but not enough in 2020. They then corrected pretty dramatically between 2020 and 2024. And so again, there are a lot of indicators nationally that suggest that we don't know a lot about how the electorate in 2024 is different from 2020.
Yeah.
A pandemic election is very different than the election that we're facing. You have a significant change demographically in the electorate. And so we don't know how to capture that voting population. So my presumption is actually by Wednesday we'll know, because to your point, we're really looking at Pennsylvania. It's hard to imagine whoever wins Pennsylvania not winning the presidency. If Kamala Harris wins Pennsylvania, it means she already won Michigan, and then there's one other state that she has to win to be elected. If Donald Trump wins Pennsylvania, the election's over. Right? There's just no way the math works out for Kamala Harris to be elected if she does win Pennsylvania. So ultimately, we're going to know pretty well when we're staring at Pennsylvania. We're going to know pretty well looking at the suburban counties around Philadelphia.
Well, buckle up. Here we go.
Buckle up. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Corey.
Thank you.